It's the 10th of September, 2022. Abhayagiri Monastery. And I ask permission from the Sangha and the laity to say a few words. Longpo is not here to bow to ask permission this evening. He has a seatbelt inflicted injury on his chest. Thankfully, that's the only injury he has from the van being totaled yesterday in a head-on collision. And this can happen any time, but we've been incredibly fortunate, and this is the first time it's ever happened to us. So the van actually being in a head-on collision. It was on Tomkai Road about a mile down, and Anagarika Justin was driving, and Longpo was in the passenger seat. Ajahn Titapanyo was in the middle seat of the van. And Humvee happened to swerve into the wrong lane, so no fault of our own. But this can happen anytime. All it takes is one distracted person. So even if it might not be our fault, it can just happen at any time. So it's a good reflection, and it's good to think about these things to keep us from becoming complacent. And I was actually talking with Longpo just the other day that at breakfast time, it's one of the reasons I haven't disrobed, is actually thinking, what if I was to disrobe and drive out of the monastery and just get slammed by a car and die? And how lame would that be? And just think, okay, well, better just to stay here, stay ordained. But thankfully, nobody was killed or even hurt very badly. Yeah, so we're incredibly fortunate. So there's old friends of the monastery who are in hospice right now. There's actually, haven't heard any word about Cassidy, but she was predicted to die a couple days ago, but I haven't heard anything from the people who are looking after her, so curious about that. Also, Metika, who's been a dear friend and teacher for a long time, and I also haven't heard word of Peter Dale Scott, but he hasn't been doing well. He's been back in the hospital. So these are people I've known since I was in Anagarika here at Abhayagiri, so very good friends, having built up these relationships over the years. And then time passes and death occurs, so that's going to happen to all of us. It's a very good reflection, a very important reflection that the Buddha said we need to think about all the time, no matter what age we are, because it can really happen any time. And this is one meaning of Mara. One meaning of Mara is death. There's actually the 5 different Maras. One of them is the death principle, or Machura Mara is the death principle. There's also Kanda Mara, which is the Mara of the 5 khandas. This body and mind complex is bound up with conditionality and is impermanent, subject to arising and passing away, so that's what we call Kanda Mara. And then there's Kamma Mara. Kamma Mara is the Mara of Kamma, or of the results of our actions. This is also bound up in birth and death, the conditioned realm. So there's Kanda Mara, Kamma Mara, I believe Sankhara Mara, which is the Mara that's just inherent in sankharas, in all conditioned things. Then there's the Deva Puta Mara, which is Mara as a character, Mara as an actual being, is depicted in the suttas from time to time. Mara as an actual being that has that is also bound to birth and death is Deva Puta Mara. So, meaning like Mara, the Deva, according to the Buddhist cosmology, that's one of the higher ups in the Paranimitta Vasawati Deva realm, the Devas who delight in the creations of others. It's the highest sense sphere Deva realm. Then there's the Machura Mara, which is Mara as the death principle. And anything that arises and passes away, anything that's bound by birth and death, belongs to Mara. Mara is the leader and the owner of that. So there's no liberating the khandhas themselves. There's liberation from the khandhas. There's liberation from the khandhas, but the khandhas themselves are bound up with Mara, so those aren't a true refuge. We can't ever gain something ultimate in the khandhas themselves. But we can make use of them. We can make use of them for liberation. So this is very, very important, and a very kind of subtle point that we make use of these khandhas. So we can be grateful for them, and we can, in a way we can be grateful for Mara, because Mara is the teacher. Without, the Buddha's talking about, without insight into Mara and that which is beyond Mara, there's no liberation from suffering. So these are some ideas about Mara. We can talk about death and the deathless and these different principles, but then how do these play out and how are these ideas practically applied in our daily life? So we've got the daily schedule of the monastery. So how are these things applied? And the Buddha talked about mindfulness and these different meditation techniques, anapanasati, satipatthana, the four foundations of mindfulness, Noble Eightfold Path. So we hear about these different teachings, we read about these different teachings, so how are these practically applied? And I like to think of the Noble Eightfold Path as an integrated approach to practice. So you have cultivations of body, speech, and mind in there. So we learn from the outset it's not just about meditation, and it's certainly not about trying to stop thinking. We can have that misunderstanding. It's a very common misunderstanding when we come to practice, is that we're trying to stop thinking. So that's certainly not the case. And although the Buddha did say that at a certain point the thought formation can settle or subside of its own accord, there'll still be different mental factors present, but he didn't say to do that as an act of will. It's a natural result of a settling process. So he didn't say to stop thinking as an act of will, so we can just forget about trying to do that. And it'll be for our benefit if we can just forget about trying to stop thinking. But it's more about letting go of unskillful thoughts and trying to steer the mind in a skillful direction. So the mind always needs something to chew on, always wants to do some sort of work, so we might as well give it something good. It always wants to feed on something, so we might as well give it something nourishing and beneficial to feed on. So what is that? That's the breath and these wholesome dhammas. That's the right thought. That's samma sankappa, the second factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. And that is thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of non-ill will, thoughts of non-harming. So if we think of those last two in a positive way, we can think of non-ill will as metta and non-harming as karuna, these two qualities. We can focus on those. Metta is I prefer the Thai translation, which is goodwill. And then karuna is, we translate it as compassion. It's the wish for others to be free of suffering. So there's a slight difference in emphasis between metta and karuna. Metta would be the wish for others to be happy, so goodwill. Karuna, compassion, is the wish for others to be free of suffering. So those are similar, but the emphasis is different. Whereas with metta, we're focusing on happiness, and karuna is focused a bit more on suffering. So the Buddha classed that as right thought. So metta karuna is to be cultivated as much as possible. And we can always send our intentionalities in that direction. So kamma is intention, kamma is intentionality. And so the teachings are really pointing to steering the mind in more of a wholesome direction in terms of intention, and away from an unwholesome direction in terms of intention. And for all general purposes, we can define Dhamma practice. We might think, what is practice? What is Dhamma practice? And we could define that as the modification of our behavior by body, speech, and mind to be more in line with natural truths, or what we could say more in line with Dhamma. We could also think of it as the modification of our behavior by body, speech, and mind to be more in line with creating the causes for the ending of suffering, i.e. the Noble Eightfold Path. So the Noble Eightfold Path, it lines out right action, right speech. This is the precepts that we're talking about. Right action being refraining from taking life, refraining from taking that which is not given, refraining from sexual misconduct. That's in terms of the 5 precepts. If we take the 8 precepts, that's the 3rd precept becomes refraining from any type of sexual activity. And then right speech is 4-fold, and that is refraining from lying, refraining from divisive speech, refraining from harsh speech, and refraining from useless speech. And so that's the 4-fold right speech, and that's those 2 factors, right action, right speech, those are necessary factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. So those are things we can apply in our daily lives. But at the same time, not to get overly idealistic, we do have to be realistic. So we're going to make mistakes. That's okay. These things are based on the 7th path factor of mindfulness. So right mindfulness, as we have more mindfulness, it's only natural that the action of body and speech is going to become more and more wholesome. And as we learn about Kamma 101, the Buddha talks about the possible and the impossible, and this is a very important and vital point to contemplate all the time and remind ourselves of all the time, is this idea of Kamma, that it is impossible for a unwholesome action of body, speech, or mind to result in happiness. That is impossible. But for a unwholesome action of body, speech, and mind to result in suffering, this is possible. So just to repeat that one more time, that unwholesome action of body, speech, or mind to result in happiness, that's actually impossible, according to the Buddha's teaching. So wholesome action, body, speech, and mind, for that action itself, so we take that action as an isolated event. So for a wholesome action of body, speech, or mind to result in suffering, that is impossible. A wholesome action of body, speech, or mind, such as an intention of metta or an intention of karuna, for that to result in suffering for oneself, that is impossible. So even if we want it to result in suffering, it actually can't. It's just a natural law, according to the Buddha's teaching. And for a wholesome action of body, speech, and mind to result in happiness, well-being, ease, contentment, this is possible. The degree of happiness is going to depend on that particular intentionality, that particular action. So as we contemplate that, that's the teaching, that's what the Buddha is teaching. It's just a matter of, through the course of the practice, in our heart of hearts, deep down inside, we don't believe that yet. So we might intellectually believe that, but deep down inside, the heart, on a very deep level, does not believe that yet. And that's why we keep tripping up, that's why we keep suffering. So intellectually, we can say, yeah, that's right, that's perfect, that's right, I believe that. But deep down inside, on a heart level, we don't yet believe it. And so that's the whole practice, is what we mean by training the mind. It's actually training the heart more on an emotional level. Do we really, on a very deep level, really understand that? So the Buddha's saying if we did, we wouldn't suffer anymore. If we did understand it, because the mind, the heart, is always trying to get out of suffering, always longing and wishing for an end of suffering, doesn't want to suffer. Suffering is unwanted, suffering is bad. Why does it keep happening? It's because we keep planting the causes for it. So if we really had discernment, if we really had wisdom, we wouldn't plant any causes for suffering and it wouldn't arise. So unfortunately, there's this thing called ignorance, and because there's this unfortunate time lag from action to result, so if the results of our kamma were immediate, we wouldn't be able to do anything wrong because the suffering would happen immediately. And unfortunately, it's kind of this sick joke of samsara that there's this time lag between action and result. And so we aren't able to see that certain things we're doing are actually bringing suffering to ourselves because they're unwholesome. And the things we kind of need to do, they might be difficult or might entail some sort of patience and willingness to go up against temporary unpleasantness. But those are such as restraining ourselves from, say, sexual misconduct or taking life or whatever. So those things, it's temporary lack of gratification, temporary unpleasantness, but leading to great contentment, great happiness, great harmonizing. So sometimes at first we kind of take it on confidence. We have a sense of confidence. Don't want to say faith, because faith is a loaded word and it has a connotation of blind belief, but I'll use the word confidence. At first we might see senior practitioners or people who are Dhamma practitioners their whole lives and they're having very good deaths, and it seems to be that way almost every time. So we see that and we develop a sense of confidence. Okay, maybe I'll take on the practice and see where it takes me. There's unpleasantness and we might not have good experiences at first, so there's this time lag between good actions and their results. And then over time, when we do start to get the results of the practice, then we'll have some sort of confirmed confidence, and that gives us more and more ability to keep going. So it's kind of like walking to a destination. So we have to walk. We have to actually keep going. We might get tired along the way, and there might be obstacles. It might be unpleasant, but that doesn't mean we turn back. We want to keep walking, and it's far. So with the practice, we're going somewhere. that's far. We're going far away from where we were before, far away from suffering, far away from dissatisfaction. So we have to walk far. We have to take it all the way. And so we can't turn back just because we aren't at the just because we can't get there quickly. And because we're walking far, we do have to pace ourselves. We're not going to be able to just sprint there and get to the end immediately. Those of us who are sincere, invariably, we try that in the beginning. For myself, I was a very impulsive person right in the beginning. Still am in many ways, but in the beginning was extra impulsive and thought, okay, I'll become an anagarika and in 3 months I'll be enlightened. I'll just practice really, really hard and I'll go up against any hardship. I don't care how tired I am. I don't care how hungry I am. And I'll just practice really hard, meditate all day, do the sitting walking meditation, 4 hours of walking meditation, multiple hours of sitting meditation. And I'll skip breakfast. I'll do all sorts of austerities, and I'll just go really, really hard for a short period of time, and then that'll be it, and then the rest of my life will just be cruise for the rest of my life. And found out that wasn't really how it works. So it's more of there's all sorts of unwholesome mental factors and physical factors involved in those types of intentions. So then it's like, okay, back to square one, start again, start over. Sometimes we just find we just have to drop everything. Okay, that came from a place of misunderstanding. Just got to drop everything, just got to start over. And then those habits creep back in. Okay, I need more austerities, that's why I'm suffering. I need to be stricter with the rules, that's why I'm suffering. It must be something outside, that's why I'm suffering. It must be because the work monk made me do what I don't want to do. That's why I'm suffering. It must be because I need to be less austere. That's why I'm suffering. It must be because Ajahn Pasano and Ajahn Amro told me something I didn't want to hear. That's why I'm suffering. So we're externalizing the suffering as a habit and then coming back to, oh, this is suffering. That's the first noble truth. What did the Buddha say the cause of suffering is? He said craving, tanha, kamma tanha, bhava tanha, vibhava tanha, craving for sensuality, craving to be, craving to not be, craving for becoming, craving for annihilation. That's the cause of suffering. So I was thinking, oh, the rules are the cause of the suffering. These external situations are the cause of my suffering. We can apply that to anything, and that's the delusion. That's the delusion teaching us all the time. This other person who disagrees with me is the cause of my suffering. This family member who disagrees with me is the cause of my suffering. This boss is the cause of my suffering. This unjust act done towards me is the cause of my suffering. Go for months, years, and then remember, oh, right, craving is the cause of suffering. It's like an epiphany that has to hit us over and over again. That's very empowering and liberating to have that thought. Oh, right, I can do something about it. Because if it's that other person causing my suffering, we can't do anything about it. What are we going to do? Get rid of that person somehow? Make them go away? We can't do that. Run away from them. There's just going to be somebody else that we run into that disagrees with us. We suffer again. So we find we can't take refuge in external circumstances being the way we want them. There's always going to be that desire for it to be otherwise, and then I'll be happy. And then we just keep suffering. But if we realize that craving is the cause of suffering, that really empowers us because it's actually on us. We can actually do something about it. And we have that choice. We can do that. We can do something about it. So seeing suffering and seeing that there is the cause of suffering, which is craving, we can actually do something about that. And we can do that anytime. We can choose to do that anytime. We don't have to wait for the external circumstances to change. We don't have to wait for the pandemic to be over. We don't have to wait for the political situation to change to stop suffering. This is the Buddha's teaching. This is right view. This is the way it is. We can stop suffering through realizing that craving is the cause of suffering. Because these external things, it's always going to be unsatisfactory. It's always going to be moving around all over the place. There's always going to be something to be made better, something to be fixed. It doesn't mean we don't try to make things better. It doesn't mean we don't try to make things more comfortable or more convenient on an external level. We can optimize things. We can try to make a situation which is more beneficial to practice for us. We can go live in a monastery, for example. But even monasteries aren't perfect situations. There's no perfect monastery. Of course, those of us who become monks, a lot of us will have that thought. I think it was up until I was 7 years as a bhikkhu, I probably had the thought very often, when I become an abbot, I'm going to make the perfect monastery. So if I was made the abbot, I would make the perfect monastery, and I would change this and that, and it would be done this or that way, and it would be better. It would be better because I know the best. I know the best way to make the perfect monastery. Of course, time goes on, and it's starting to sink in that, oh yeah, you can't just impose your will on other people. That's called tyranny. So if I could just impose my will on everybody and they would be happy about it, I'd be helping everybody, they'd be happy about it. They should be grateful. They should be grateful I'm imposing my will on them. You'll thank me later. You're suffering now, but you'll thank me later. So that would be the quick way to be driven out of a monastery. So I find it's actually more about flexibility, malleability. That's also in the Buddha's teachings. So many times we find our own ideas are just so mistaken. It's so humbling. I think if I didn't have insight into how mistaken all my ideas are, I don't think I would still be here. I would have run away a long time ago. So the mind is untrustworthy. But there is the Buddha's teachings. There is something trustworthy that we can think about. So, metta, karuna, these are always wholesome things worth cultivating, no matter who we are, no matter where we are. Goodwill, the wish for others to be happy. Karuna, compassion, the wish for others to be free from suffering. But it's also for ourselves, the goodwill for ourselves, the wish for ourselves to be happy. That's not arrogant or conceited to wish that. Compassion for ourselves, the wish that we be free from suffering. If we don't want to be free from suffering, then we won't practice. We have to actually want this. And we actually have to want it pretty bad. We have to really want to be free of suffering. We have to be able to put forth the effort, sustained effort, and develop a sense of perseverance, a long-enduring mind. As we develop our perseverance over time, and we keep the precepts through the ups and downs of the years as they go by, and then we'll develop more and more confidence in these practices. And that sense of contentment and ease will build up. But there's a danger in that as well, in that, so for one who practices, developing a sense of ease and contentment is considered difficult, but for one who develops a sense of ease and contentment, say in the holy life, particularly in the monastic life, but also in the life of a practitioner, for anyone who wants to take their meditation practice seriously and do it on a very regular basis. Ease and contentment, as a sustained ease and contentment, is difficult to develop. But for one who has developed contentment in the practice, in the holy life, then there's another difficulty that can arise, which is taking it to the next level again, which is seeing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma. So we can actually get into like a cruise control type state where things are good enough, but we don't want to take it to the next level. So at that point, we might have to prod ourselves a little bit and say, okay, yeah, I've got a sense of ease and contentment, but I can take this a little bit further. I can take it to the next step in line with my original intentions. That's where perseverance is really important. That's where it's like, okay, that sense of just not giving up. On a certain level, it doesn't really matter what we're experiencing as long as we don't give up, as long as we don't break the precepts, as long as we stay on the path. Keep walking, keep walking, keep walking, keep moving forward. And we won't regret it. So those are a few reflections for this evening. I think that's enough for now. I'll leave it there.